So do you want to start then?
So I am Clare Kenny, and I help organisations move their people from survival mode into sustainable performance. And that can be through tools, techniques, but it's much more focusing on that leadership and culture element of what environments are we creating for people and how can we make them the best environments they can be to help people thrive and perform at their best.
And Claire, you have had some good organisations you've worked for.
Yes.
Perhaps I'll say one or two of those.
Yes. So I used to work in-house at Burberry. I oversaw the global wellbeing strategy at Burberry. And now I am very lucky. I've worked with many, many big, well-known brands, Warner Brothers Discovery, HSBC, Channel 4, KPMG, Harry Potter Studios. So a really nice range of organisations. Tends to be kind of big global corporates, but I do stuff across, smaller startups as well.
For a GP like myself, qualified as a GP, it all sounds so glamorous. We always think, we're stuck in our little room all the time, we're seeing patients. And that's how I started. So I'm a GP. And I think I realised fairly early on when I set up health walks in green gyms that actually health was way more than what I was doing, giving out blood pressure tablets and referring people for operations, important as though that is, and I'm never going to say, the NHS does a brilliant job in treatment, but actually most of health sits outside, and the workplace is a place where a lot of people spend a lot of time, and that can actually ruin their health, or it can really make their health brilliant. So it's such an important place. So my history kind of taking up is setting up Intelligent Health, which is a company that really tries to initially bring communities up into really good health by connecting them to themselves, making sure you've got that social capital, as they call it, and then also connecting to nature. And then realise that actually the corporates are a community in themselves. They're just like any community. And so trying to do the same thing and trying to get corporates to understand how do we actually generate health, really good health in a community of the workplace, and take it from there. But given I've got no knowledge at all from the big corporates, and general practice you don't, I do know a bit of a science because that's been the interest, which is why it's so brilliant to talk to you. And having worked with you as well, it's been brilliant.
Yeah, and I was reflecting on this in the days leading up to recording today, thinking about, what are the themes and what do we focus on, and very much your approach in terms of it's not about necessarily here's a medication and that's it, right? It's a much more holistic approach. There are so many lifestyle things that can happen in communities in the way that you're living, and I think that really is my ethos when it comes to working with organisations. It is so easy to say, we've got a stress problem, so here's a few tools to help people with stress, but actually not thinking about what is it that we're doing in the corporate environment, in that culture that is creating the stress in the first place. What are the triggers? What are the underlying causes? Not just how do we paper over and alleviate some of the symptoms in the short term. It's like, what do we do in the long term to make this more effective?
And I think and I'm being charitable here, most people kind of feel they're trying to do the right thing by incentivising staff, by being a little bit kind of, because we all need a bit of motivation, we all need a bit of stress in order to work. And it's that acute stress we muddle up with chronic stress. And they are two totally separate things. Acute stress is completely normal. It's what a zebra has on the plains when a lion's about to attack them, and they'll go into acute stress, run like, the clappers to get out of the lion's way. And then when that's over, they're back playing and they're back feeding again. And that's all completely normal. And that's motivating them for survival, which is exactly what we do when we have a stressful period. But chronic stress is so different. That is, you wake up with it, you go to bed with it, it never stops. And it just wears the body down bit by bit.
And it's thinking about from an organisational perspective, there will be moments of necessary stress, right? We have a deadline and we've all got to put in the hours and get that done. However, from what I see working with so many different organisations is the majority of the time it is unnecessary stress. It is ambiguity. It is like toxic environments. It is too many meetings. It is being deeming everything urgent, not having any clarity about what to prioritise, not managing expectations properly. So people are constantly in a state of, fight or flight. completely unnecessarily. And then when that necessary threat comes in, or that necessary demand, people don't have any more to give because they're trying to survive day to day, just dealing with all this kind of unnecessary triggers. So how do we focus on saying, yes, stress can be useful and there are times where it is natural and we're going to respond in that way, but how do we think about all the ways in which we're causing unnecessary stress as well?
And that's really interesting, because I think that kind of accumulation of stress which we don't need, is that because of disorganization? Is that because people are all trying to do the right thing, but actually we've got ourselves layered with so many different so much bureaucracy now, by layering more and more and more stuff and governance and everything else? What's kind of behind that? Because just before we move on to the kind of, what that chronic stress is and what happens to it, I would love you to just understand, when you go into a company, you see these unnecessary meetings, the toxic stress, the toxic culture. Nobody designed it like that. How come it's ended up like that?
I think you get into bad habits a lot of the time. And I do find that a group of humans like to overcomplicate things. We can see it just everywhere, right? It's like as soon as a group of people get together, it's like, well, I need to be involved in this and I need to be involved in this, and it gets kind of extra complicated. But I have worked in organisations or worked for organisations where, if I take, for example, something like meeting culture, where it's like we have meetings about everything and everyone's involved in these meetings and we're always in meetings and no one has time to do anything else. I have had times where I've said, hold on, can we take a step back for a moment? Why are we doing this? Why are you in this meeting? You're on 200 grand a year. An hour of your time is actually, it costs a lot of money. Why are you in this meeting and then this meeting and then this meeting? And what can we do to strip that back? And actually people are quite surprised. They're like, oh gosh, it's like this is the way we've always done things. I think the biggest killer to improvement, optimization, innovation is, oh, well, this is how we've always done it. And creep where this culture is. Yes, the majority of the time I think people have good intent. I don't think that is always the case, unfortunately. Or there's I don't care. I want to put people under this pressure and actually perhaps my inability to manage my own stuff and my own frustrations seeps out, and I don't really care about the impact of that. But a lot of the time people do want to create a nice environment for people to work in, an environment where people can be at their best. But the habit is, well, let's just put in a meeting about that because it feels like action, rather than let's put in a meeting about that. Let's be busy. We'll have 100 priorities, because if we just keep on working and we work all the time, we can trust in ourselves that we're doing a good job or that we're trying our best. And I'm so that is I do that a lot, where I'm like, well, at least I'm doing loads of stuff, so it must be. And actually the most, when I really get the best out of myself in terms of energy management, in terms of stress management, in terms of productivity, is when I go, hold on, what do I not need to do? What do I need to strip out here? What is a depriority? What am I wasting my time on? What are the things that are actually really draining me and not giving me the much reward? And kind of flipping on its head and thinking about, instead of trying to fill every single pocket of time with activity, which I see a lot in corporate environments, is going, you know what, it's actually okay if there's an hour here where no one has anything. Like, shock horror, because we might actually do better if we have these pockets of white space and these pockets of time where people can recover or focus or just allow their brains to kind of percolate and come up with ideas. So I think it is often bad habits, the way it feels like it's always been done, and a need to appear busy, to feel busy, and almost it allows you to go, well, maybe I didn't do that to my best ability, or we didn't hit that target, but how possibly could we have? We're all so busy. It's almost like a little bit of a barrier or an excuse as well to then not have to really kind of focus on that performance. It's more like, well, we got through this busy period, even if we didn't get through it at such a high quality of output.
It's almost like busyness becomes a kind of badge of honor, doesn't it? And you kind of wear it. It's like when you ask someone who you haven't seen for some time, oh, how are you getting on? They say, oh, busy, 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 you know. And that is, you know, nobody ever says, actually, I'm really, you know, not doing very much at the moment, and I'm actually quite cool about it and everything. Nobody says that. They always say busy, busy. And interesting when you think of an organization having those down periods where they can be creative, etc. The human body is a bunch of cells that's like a big workplace with millions of people, which are cells, all working together. And if we don't allow that down space, if we don't allow the vagal nerve to take control over a while, and it can happen sometimes just for a few minutes a day, you know, repeatedly, then we don't have time to repair our cells. We don't have time for growth. We don't have time for anything that actually stops us from getting disease. So we'll eventually end up with disease. And it's just like a company, you know, if a company's working on busy, busy all the time, never having those down periods, it's going to not have time for reflection. It's not going to have time for staff to recoup and really invest them. It's not going to have time even to perhaps service some of their processes and things like that, because and eventually it all falls apart. So the human and the body and the workplace are very similar in absolutely essential to have those down periods. And for our culture, they're seen to be either weak or they're not seen to be useful. And I think we've lost the ability to understand how to use those. I think we've almost, as you say, it's a habit. That if you do have a down period, you kind of feel guilty because you don't know how to use it constructively.
Or that you need to appear busy. And I'll do that myself, where perhaps I'll be having a moment with my feet up and then I can hear my husband come in and I'm like, oh, must look like I'm busy. Like he's going to be like, well, you haven't earned that. And it's that feeling, that appearance of having to always be busy and almost be a martyr to it, that you're just so worn down because you don't earn that opportunity to rest. What you said reminded me. I did an open workshop recently, which was around how to get out of survival mode, and I invited some people, and I invited someone who I met. We did TEDx's at the same event, and she replied saying, it sounds really, really interesting, but I'm just not in this. This is not my life. And I was just like, wow, you're like the first person I've ever met who isn't like, oh my God, I live in survival mode. Like she was just like, this is fantastic, and she wasn't rude about it. She's just like, doesn't apply to me. And I was sort of like, gosh, oh right, wow, like that's sad. That was such an anomaly to hear someone be like, no, I'm cool, I'm chill.
It's almost a bit intimidating because they've got their act together.
I know.
I haven't. We all
it
haven't.
did feel a bit like this, like she's found the magical, system, and nobody else has. But
so I think one of a lot of new understanding about health and what's going on in the body, and it's really exciting stuff. So I've always been a bit of a nerd on mitochondria, which are the energy cells, but they also do so much more than just an energy plant. They switch the cell on and they kill the cell if they have to. So they decide on death of a cell. They're the arbitrator. They're the CEO of a cell. So they're in charge. They switch on the immune system. They are in charge. They actually talk to each other. They've got their own DNA. They're little bacteria actually that live in us. But they used to be a bacteria a billion years ago. Then in all life has them, and they're about 500 to 1,000 per cell, and they have all our energy constraints there. And what the new thinking of, which fits so well with what you've been saying in the company, is that it's called the energy constraint theory. So we have a certain, and when I say humans, every single living species has a certain energy constraint. Unfortunately, you can't just keep eating and adding more energy. There's a point where you can't go any further. So you're going around with this energy constraint, and then if you do lots of physical activity, obviously you're burning up energy, which is having to be from within because you're not able to get any more. So you take it away from the stress side of things. So you that energy is used up, but it has to be paid back again. So very slowly you pay it back again, which is why you don't lose weight very well when you're exercising only. Which is why you have to change your diet a bit. Because you're using much energy that you need from a diet, and any excess food just goes to fat. So you have that. Now, if you're chronically stressed, and we've told about acute stress, which kind of merges to chronic stress. You mentioned toxic stress, which I think it's a really good example. It's chronic stress, toxic stress, bad stress. There are lots of names for it. It's where you've got stuck in a stressful mode. So the acute stress actually is not bad at all for us if it's done very peaks and troughs.
And it serves a really key purpose, right? To survive or to save something, or
And if you're about to give a talk or something, you're 100% focused. And if you really get all of that energy into that point, you do the job really well. When you go into that chronic stress, you're using up an extra 10 or 20% of your total energy just because your metabolic rate's gone up, your adrenaline's going up, your muscles are all primed, you're breathing harder, your heart rate's faster. So you're using up energy, but you've got a finite amount of energy. So where's that energy come from? The body takes it from other bits. It takes it from the immune system.
Right.
It takes it from your frontal cortex, which is the whole point of work is our frontal cortex. So when we're chronically stressed, actually our performance drops because our brain is now shut down a bit in order to conserve the energy. Funny enough, it takes it from muscles as well, because muscles aren't actually that useful for all the time. So it will take it away from lots and lots of bits and pieces. The one I enjoy is the pigment in your hair takes up a lot of energy. So they take it away from your pigment in the hair and you grey.
Oh my God.
So you go grey.
When my mum died, I went so grey. So it was freaky how quickly I had grey hairs just sprouting out everywhere.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, isn't it? And that's your body saying, okay, I'm using up a lot of energy. I've got to take that away because I don't need it. It's not, So when you think about it, when you're under chronic stress, yes, you're hyper, but you're also not thinking straight.
No.
Your immune system is dropping. Your repair stopped. All the growth stops. So everything on your housekeeping of your cells stops, which means toxins start to accumulate. Energy becomes less efficient. The mitochondria become less efficient. So your entire body is starting to almost shut down, which is why we get disease. And that almost all disease, including depression, anxiety, mental health, as well as all the ones that we know about heart disease and everything else. And it's all because we've got that energy using up in the stress has to be replaced. So it switches off everything else. And it's just like a company, the cash flow problem. You stop giving nice treats to your staff. You stop the maintenance of the machinery because you haven't got time for that or money. So temporarily, yes, you get through the cash flow problem and you're back out. But if you're chronically short of cash and you keep doing that, eventually the staff leave, the machines break down, and that's exactly what's happening in your body.
Yeah, I think of that in terms of like paying for things on your credit card or something like that. It can work for a while, but then as they get maxed out, there's only a certain point before it kind of all collapses in on itself. Right?
And that's the burnout. And that's exactly what happens in the burnout. Eventually your body screams at you so loudly and says, I can't do this anymore. And that's where it shuts down. And tiredness, people often think it's, we don't sleep well because of the adrenaline. Adrenaline and sleep don't go together. But tiredness can be emotional tiredness, which is the body making you feel tired, which sleep doesn't sort out. You still wake up feeling tired.
And that's because of the stress, is it?
Yeah, it's dropping your energy. It's trying to slow you down.
Okay, so if you feel tired, you won't exert as much energy.
Exactly. So it's a protective thing. So we overdo it by taking lots of coffee, lots of energy drinks, lots of to overdo it, and we're actually pushing through it. So, and of course, eventually the tiredness becomes into burnout, and burnout is the ultimate weapon the body has. Obviously, it's the final bit saying, right, I'm shutting everything down to get that energy back again. Otherwise, the cells and everything else are going to start becoming really dangerously low and on all clearing toxins and everything else.
When you're experiencing chronic stress, what are some of the signs that someone might say, oh, well, I've been stressed for a while, but it's sort of starting to become that real kind of chronic problem? What are some of the physical signs that people might spot to help them understand
Yeah, what's the difference between acute and chronic? So the chronic is acute stress can be unpleasant, but it's short-lived.
Yeah.
And it's meant to be slightly unpleasant in order to get your attention.
Yeah.
So you put that into long term and you get that whole time. So the kind of things you'll get are the adrenaline things, which are the heart rate going up, the breathing going up, the muscles feeling a bit twitchy. You're wired, but tired, as they call it, because you are wired. You can't sleep very well. You become irritable with other people because your oxytocin levels plummet. So your connection with other people changes. Interestingly, with acute stress, it's the opposite. Oxytocin goes up.
Okay.
So during COVID, and when I was working in a hospital, everyone, all the staff just hugged each other.
Yeah, it was like wartime spirit sort of feeling, isn't it?
When there's been a big disaster or accident, people really come together closely. So acute stress creates an oxytocin, which is survival, because we'll do better together than if we're apart.
Yeah.
Chronic stress is as though you're in a hostile environment. You don't trust anyone because you've no idea who's going to be attacking you or not.
Yeah.
So it goes completely in the opposite direction. So oxytocin levels drop, which means you don't trust people. You become irritable with your partner, with your friends and with work colleagues, and you withdraw a bit. And that's purely survival.
Yeah.
Because you've no idea who the enemy is or who the friend is anymore because you're in a hostile environment. So that's a big thing that most people, and that's the thing that often can disturb people the most as the relationships start to fall apart. Your sleep goes down, your energy drops. It can be up and down a bit, but it definitely, you feel tired a lot of the time. And then your appetite can do two things. It can go up or down. So for some people, it's comfort eating. It's a horrible place to be in chronic stress. So you try and numb it. So you smoke, you drink. You do crazy things. And you also eat. The other thing is your frontal part of the brain is now shut down a lot more, which is the inhibitory part of your system. So you lose your inhibitions, which is why gambling, lifestyle craziness and eating can go out of the window because you're now
so
not
only are you wanting to kind of numb it, you also care less about the repercussions of doing it.
Because that frontal part of the brain uses up a load of energy and it doesn't need it anymore.
So you'd be much more likely to take silly risks at work as well.
You will, because you'll
make silly decisions or and we've talked about that kind of lack of trust, which we can talk about a bit more, but you're less likely to be weighing up your options and making a sensible decision about something you need to do in the workplace.
Because you're not, and your emotional regulation goes as well. So all those emotions of anger, envy, frustration, sadness, anxiety are all protective. They're all actually positive, in inverted commas, because every single one of them is a protection. But of course, when you're in a workplace, all of them become negative because they're all the ones pushing other people away, being unreasonable. But the emotional regulation means that they go very much more out the window, but also you don't have that inhibition. So yes, you make rash decisions, you lose it. And we all know, you just watch television for 5 minutes, you see people who are stressed for making daft decisions, losing their temper. That is all protective, but unfortunately it becomes negative. And I think that's one of the key things that people can understand is when they're going through this, unpleasant as it is, actually nothing is going wrong in their body. It's not pathological at this point. It's purely preventative, and it's how evolution has designed us to protect ourselves. So they're not ill, they're just in a bad place. And I think that's an indifferent, when I'm talking to patients, I always feel that they blame themselves for not, suddenly they're eating, they put on lots of weight, they're not exercising anymore. Why? Because that uses up extra energy. So your body's screaming at you not to exercise. It's trying to stop you from using up energy. And they always think it's because they're weak or they've failed and they really blame themselves for this change. And I say, no, your body's doing exactly as it's been designed to do. You've just got to get rid of that origin of where that chronic stress is coming. And it's three things. It's not feeling safe, not feeling valued, and not feeling you belong. They're the three things that
Safety,
the human...
value, belonging.
And then if you reduce those, our body now, our default is always to stress. And that's a new thing that's been discovered. So you don't even need to have stressors around your life to make you feel stressed. But if you don't feel safe, or you don't feel valued, or don't feel belong, you'll default to stress.
Okay, so things might not feel objectively that stressful, but if you're feeling that lack of, like, say, in the workplace, you're not getting that value or that recognition, or and things like ambiguity, right? It's so many organisations are going through big, massive restructures, or they are making people redundant, and that already immediately, even if you aren't being told you're being made redundant, but it's sort of happening around you, immediately that kind of baseline safety is lost, that sense of safety. So that's going to have an impact on how people are. And I remember
you talking about this and saying, actually, of course, restructures have to happen and things like that, but you can do it where people may not feel so, but they feel valued.
Yeah.
And there's a way of doing it.
Yeah.
And they also feel they belong, even though everyone says these are really tough times and tough decisions. So you can do that, can't you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I have let people go in a way that I'm still in touch with them now, like 10, 15 years later. And I'm not saying, I'm the oracle of doing that, but it's still valuing people as a human being and being really transparent about, where you're at and what needs to happen. And I think often ambiguity or radio silence, like lack of communication in organisations, causes a big, trigger for people's nervous systems, because even if as a leader you say, I can't tell you right now, that's more information than usually leaders give, which is just to say nothing. I've got no news yet, or I will give you I'll give you information when I have it. Being able to say, right now, there are certain things I can't say, feels more authentic and more kind of genuine and open and transparent than saying nothing. And I think that often leaders they shy away from being open with people, and that ambiguity is going to, crank people's stress up and their worry up. So it's like, how can you, within the realms of what you can communicate, be as transparent and open as possible?
And why is that? Because I'm sure if you ask those leaders, is communication important? They'll also, of course it is, it's the most important thing in the world. So, and I think we all perhaps kind of veer towards it when there's a really difficult situation, but you're hoping that relationship you've already got is strong enough to be able to then see us through a difficult time.
Yeah.
So is it that people haven't had the relationship, or is there something else that's going on that stops them from communicating?
So I think that often everyone is very overwhelmed. Everyone has so much stuff on their plate. And I think as a leader, the idea of going, well, I'm going to have to communicate this information and there's going to be a bit of a fallout and I'm going to have to manage emotions. It's like, I am already here. And the idea of having to do that as well is going to tip me over the edge. And if you're thinking about all the things that you talked about in terms of people feeling stressed, even if you're the role model and the leader that's supposed to be having that communication, you don't trust anyone either. And you're frustrated and you've yelled at your husband this morning and you're tired and you're eating more than you should. And it's like actually just the idea of going above and beyond to communicate and to support people feels like one step too many in that environment. And it's those... I think a lot of the time, those, that 10-minute difficult conversation that actually probably could change the next 5 years of your life, or, that difficult decision, or those things that we do that are setting boundaries, cutting toxic people out of our lives, saying no, perhaps really looking at the things that are causing us certain pain and doing something about it. None of that stuff is nice to do. It's not enjoyable to do, but it has such long-term benefits. And I think often in situations where companies feel so uncertain and there's so much going on, some of that stuff is hard work to do, but it has such a long-term benefit. But I think people are just like, I can't really cope with doing any more right now, and I don't really have that much information, so I won't update, or I'm so busy worrying about my own job that right now actually my care for my team is less because I'm not even sure I'm here and I'm frustrated, or I'm being given messages that I disagree with, so it feels hard to be authentic when I'm actually thinking, that's bullshit.
That's really interesting, Claire. And I think someone coming from who hasn't worked in big corporates before, I mean, I don't think you can call the NHS a corporate, because it's probably the biggest corporate we've got in a way, of 1.5 million people, but not, for going that. I think I've always seen you have a workforce and then you have these amazing creatures called directors and senior managers who somehow are above everything. But what you're saying is they're just as human as all of us, and they're just as stressed, if not more stressed, than all of us. And therefore, they're constrained by those same things that are happening in stress as we are.
Yeah.
I know, at the ground level. And perhaps we forget the humanity that they're having to show. So if you're stressed, the last thing you want to do is be made vulnerable. And trust is all about being vulnerable. Because when you're stressed, your body will be saying no way to being vulnerable, because you don't want to. And yet they have to make themselves vulnerable to go and talk and have that difficult conversation.
Yeah. And there's different layers when it comes to leadership, and you will have your exec teams who often can feel quite disconnected from the rest of the employee workforce. And I often think that there's a lack of understanding of what it is exec teams do as well. So it's like you're thinking, well, you're up there having your meetings and stuff, and so, well, actually, when the share price shifts, it's like what's keeping an exec team up at night? Like when the share price shifts, like when there's some bad PR against the business, like all of these things that have a massive impact on them. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect between exactly what an exec team is doing and what everyone else is doing. And then you'll have senior leaders and middle managers and that kind of whole layer impact. And then the trickle down effect of who your leader is and the communication that they're giving you and the culture that they're creating by the way that they role model and the way that they are normalizing behaviors. I always think a culture is based on whatever behaviours you normalise. And if you normalise poor behaviour, the culture is made up of poor behaviour. So as leaders, how are you normalising? What behaviours are you normalising? And what behaviours are you saying are not acceptable? And so I definitely think that there's this layered effect. And often workforces, and whether employees should or shouldn't care about the fact that their leaders are human. Like, I can understand a bit going, well, that's your job and you get paid more than me, and I'm not really worried if you're stressed or not, you deal with that elsewhere. I can kind of understand that. But I think then it often feels really us and them, rather than it being like we are all human beings experiencing this together, and we all have different responses to it, and we all are impacted in different ways, instead of it being, well, you need to show up for us in kind of a robotic way as a leader. But then that doesn't create trust, does it, when you've got that lack of humanity or authenticity? So I think it's an interesting balance, I think, there.
Can you talk more about trust? Because there's a lot is said about trust. And trust organisations are meant to be 20% more productive than non-trust organisations, some say even more. And it seems so important and yet so elusive for some companies to be able to have that trust. How, if you were brought into a company who said, look, we've just done an analysis and we're a low trust organisation, help us, Claire, because we want to get into be a high trust organisation. What kind of things, because this fits in with literally everything we've said, whether it's a symptom or a cause, is probably a bit of both.
Yeah. And if you're in an organisation where you feel safe, right, that's going to have a real knock-on effect on how stressed you are. And people will ask me that question where it's like, oh, what would you do first, or what would you do like as a baseline? What's the most important thing? And it's like, how do you create psychological safety and trust within your organisation? And it is not an easy, simple do this, this and this, and you'll be able to measure it, because it can be quite intangible, and it really shifts as well. I think sometimes we forget that in the workplace we're all just human beings, and we're outside of the workplace, we're all just human beings. And you could have a friend who does something and suddenly you trust them a little less, or, you know, they do something that proves and makes you trust you a little bit more. You might have another friend that you never quite fully trust, but you're not quite sure why. So it's really kind of based on a lot of gut and very small micro behaviours. And that often can be a frustration for organisations, because organisations do love can we just do a big event and tick that box, or let's get an app, or let's get a platform and let's get that sorted, tick. But to create trust and psychological safety, it's about like every single behaviour that happens in an organisation is, and where does the dial lead? You don't get it right every time, but it's like voting. It's like you need to be getting most of the votes in terms of every behaviour, to make sure that people over time feel really safe with their leaders. Lots of things you can do. I think there are some real kind of practical things that you can do that help bring psychological safe behaviours and practices in, which are things like, to be psychologically safe in an organisation, people need to not only feel safe to be themselves, but to be safe to say, I disagree with you, or that's wrong, or you could do that better, or I found another way. And how do you innovate as a company if you can't do that? Especially in an age where, I mean, I have no idea. Like, I looked at TikTok for 1 second and went, God, no, I'm never doing that. But if I wanted to be in a business where I need to be able to understand social media, you know, for younger generations, I need someone who is younger and less experienced than me to feel safe enough to say, you don't know what you're talking about, you need to do it this way. So it's really, really important that it's not just about hierarchy or tenure or presence or the fact that you feel confident speaking up in a meeting. It's going, we're giving safety for everyone of all backgrounds, experiences, neurotypes, ways of processing, to be able to give that feedback. So from a practical perspective, how do you make sure that you're capturing that feedback and you're giving everybody a voice? Because this doesn't only help build trust, but it also helps be inclusive, and it helps leverage all of those voices and thoughts you have in the room, because you might have someone who is never going to put their hand up in a meeting and say, I think this, but they may reflect and a couple of days later feel comfortable filling in an anonymous survey, for example. But if you are only allowing people at the end of a meeting to say, yeah, I agree, or actually, have we thought about this, you're missing out on all of those other people. So how do you create space for dissent? So opening conversations like, let's think about this. We've got this idea, or we've got this project and we're about to launch. Let's for a moment be devil's advocate, and let's think about, if in 3 months' time, if this has gone wrong, what went wrong? Why did it go wrong? What could we have done? So you're almost taking the personal, like, vulnerability of saying, I think this has a problem. We're going, let's just be devil's advocate here. Let's reflect. Let's think about what we could do to overcome some of the potential obstacles here. So that's a way of creating an environment where people can descend in a safe manner. And then also things like thinking about what are some of the different formats that you capture stuff. It's not going to solve every single issue in your culture, but by just introducing more ways in which people can feed back to you, whether that is through an anonymous survey, whether that's through a Slido, whether that's through the chat function, saying, before we even speak out loud, let's everyone reflect and put our thoughts in the chat function, because then you're giving a much more level playing field for everyone to be able to feed back. And then hearing that, reflecting on that as a leader, going, I can see this and I can see this, and actually this is a great idea, I'm going to take that way. This is why we can't do this. I appreciate this, but this is the reason why we can't do this, rather than people giving feedback and then it just being like, well, I gave feedback and nothing ever changed. What a way to break trust, right? I feel like companies every year ask people the employee engagement survey, people spend ages typing in, so annoyed, and then nothing happens. I'm sure most people would rather they weren't asked than that they're asked and ignored. That's like a real way of breaking trust. So there are little practical things I think you can do to create space for dissent, for space for more voices, more brains to feed back. And then also, how can you show up as a leader in terms of how do you role model? Can you be more vulnerable? Can you open up to your own mistakes? Can you say, oh God, if I could do this again, I'd do it differently. This is what happened, and this is why, and this is how it made me feel. It made me feel a bit embarrassed, because that is a great way of someone going, oh wow, we're allowed to be human here, and they made a mistake, and now I don't feel so bad that I made that mistake, and maybe next time I won't hide it. I will open up about it, and we can help fix it sooner rather than waiting until it kind of completely explodes before you fix it. So, I mean, I could bang on about lots of other things, but there's that practical. How is your communication platform set up in a way that people are able to feed back and have a voice, and then how are you behaving in a way that demonstrates humanity, fallibility, authenticity, and that vulnerable side.
And actually, there are two things I really take away from that vulnerable bit. Usually, I've been made or you've been made vulnerable is a negative connotation. In other words, a mistake has been made and it made you vulnerable. And particularly if you're a kind of marketing, if you're the PR wraparound of the company, you don't want your CEO or your other people to feel vulnerable. But what you're saying is actually making yourself on purpose vulnerable is the only way you can get that trust. And I think people forget that because they think they can do it without changing themselves. And they can just, as you say, get an app, tick box.
Don't make me change my behaviours. I don't want to change my behaviours. It's like, well, you'll only get so far then, because a workplace is made up of millions of behaviours and kind of almost irrelevant of the platforms you use or the benefits you have. That stuff is nice, but I always think of, it was MasterCard, I think, the ad where it was like, things you can't buy, what money can't buy. And it's like, great, you're giving me this app and I've got this and this. I'm like, in reality, I could buy that myself for 150 quid a year. But what I can't buy, what money can't buy, is a boss that I feel comfortable saying, actually, I'm really struggling with my anxiety today. Or a boss that really understands that having ADHD brings great strengths and that there are going to be things that are challenged for me that she might not understand, but she respects that and gets that I feel able to do things that feel aligned to my purpose, that I feel able to enjoy that I've got people around me that I can that feel supportive. Like, those are the things that are much more, you can't just step to another organisation and be guaranteed that to have them. And I think that we don't focus enough energy on how do we create that kind of money can't buy culture to keep people in places. And
a lot of it from a leadership is perhaps, their whole personality, everything since they were a child all the way through has been led. But also, as you say, it changes rapidly. So a company going through a lot of difficulty where nobody feels safe, including a senior team who feel that chronic stress, becoming vulnerable is tough, really tough, because their brain will be saying, don't, and you can do anything, but don't make yourself vulnerable, because your brain is trying to protect your body. So you can see that if the senior leadership team don't get this whole thing about chronic stress, they won't be able to lead properly, because emotions won't be regulated. Their frontal cortex won't have the inhibitions anymore. They'll have, with their best intention, their body will still be shifting to we become different creatures when we're under chronic stress. We are not the same as someone who's got it all together. And you can't lead in that group, in that way.
And we're just way worse. And I find that kind of depressingly hilarious that organisations will hire all of these incredible people and then chuck them into an environment where they just are worse performers and put them in a situation where their outputs are not going to be as good, and then kind of, like, why is everyone so rubbish? So and yes, there are lots of factors, and we can completely appreciate that. That feels like the whole world is like that at the moment. And there's going to be lots of factors that create that. But what are we doing that is causing additional stuff that actually we could strip out to give our people a fighting chance to perform at the level that we would hope they would? Because I think that we're often not giving people a fighting chance. And I will talk to so many people where it's like, what is it that causes you so much stress? And it is always, I'm constantly in meetings. I have to do my work in the evening. I'm told one thing by senior leadership, but day-to-day reality is that they don't care about that. We care about this, but really I'm not seeing that. People are emailing late at night. People are, we're not collaborating properly. So we're not trusting each other. There's lots of conflict. It's like all of that stuff is contributing, and there's enough stuff causing us stress that we have no control over. So how can we address the stuff that we do have some sort of control over to not be just adding a whole extra layer of chronic stress causes to people in work environments, and making them feel that that's just how it has to be, that because that's just work, and I have to recover from it at the weekend, and I'm snappy at my kids, and I don't do the exercise I want to because I come back and I'm too exhausted. And that's just life, and I just have to accept that.
And that's wrong. The body is not pathological yet, but it will end up in that like that if you keep it going. And I think but I think that knowledge of knowing, okay, this is happening in my life. It's just, I have to suck it up because that's what it is. Fine, you can do that for a short period of time. And if it's got, an end to it, or there's something else, but usually it's not. And you usually get stuck in it. And then actually that validates you. You're the hardworking, busy person. And that starts defining you. And then it's even more hard to get out of that because everyone says, oh, you're so amazing. You work so hard. You're so amazing. You've got, 3 children, and you've got, you do this voluntary work, and you do your work, and you're always, and you start to feel validated and feel quite good about yourself. So you don't want to stop doing it. And yet your body's saying, whoa, 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 stopping. What I might just say then is, and you said about what are the signs then when it does become pathological, because that is a shift that happens.
And when you say pathological, is that like you're stepping towards burnout?
So it's depression, which is a completely different physiological thing. They call it general anxiety disorder, which is the definition, because we can have anxiety, and that's not pathological, but call it chronic anxiety, or GAD as it's called, is a very different beast. And then you can get, other things like even bipolar or breakdown. And what's happened is that finally the brain and every part of the body is now working on empty. So the cells are just not able to keep up with the demands being made of them. So they start to fail. And the energy level starts to drop in them. And what the new research has shown, that it's almost pretty random about what brain disorder you'll get.
Oh, okay.
So it's like a car with a big end that's not working. I don't know about cars. I probably don't have big ends anymore because they're all electric. But let's say there's a car where there's a major problem with the engine,
right,
and it's really shaking. You've no idea who's going to fall up. Was it the hubcap, or was it the boot? And that's what they're saying with the brain. And genetically, we might be predispositioned to a bit of depression or anxiety or nothing. You might be incredibly resilient because we're all so different. So when they've done scans, they've tried to find out, someone with depression, have they got a depression blob that goes up, or is there an anxiety? No. It's diffuse all the way through.
Right.
Schizophrenia? No. Bipolar? No.
Right.
There's no part of the brain that shows up. So the body has excelled itself and sort of trying to keep going. Now it can't. And then your brain starts to fail because the energy is not being kept up. And you'll notice big difference. You'll suddenly notice that you're waking up in the morning at about 3 a.m. And not getting back to sleep again. You're tearful.
The doom hour, 3 a.m., right?
You're tearful, and you are holding it back. You carry on working. That's a crazy thing. You still deliver, but everything is an effort now. It's really, really, really hard work. So you're taking longer to do it, but because of the personality you tend to make sure you finish those deadlines. Yeah. You literally lose all your relationship ability because either you're aggressive and snappy or you withdraw completely. And depression is another protective feature evolved, in which if you're ill, you become depressive behaviour to withdraw you from the rest of the tribe because you don't want to give them whatever illness it is, and to make you sleep a lot because you want to recover by having your immune system coming back. And when I say sleep a lot, you're resting a lot rather than feeling tired, because you often don't sleep because you're now on the outside. Therefore, you have to be vigilant because you're not protected as much.
Right.
So when you become ill, you are pushed out to the outer part of your family or team because they don't want you to have it. So illness, behaviour and depression are very similar. But it's that tearfulness, that sleep disorder, the tiredness is overwhelming, the relationships become a problem. You can't concentrate because your brain now is really going down, and you have no ability to enjoy the things that you used to enjoy. You can't plan for the future. All your planning thing goes completely wrong. That is your brain really shutting right down. And if you leave it, it then becomes chemical imbalance and other things. That's where the pathology starts. Yeah. Whether it's antidepressants, whether it's counselling, whether you can do it yourself through connection to nature, the biggest buttress, the biggest support you have to stop that from happening from all research is social. So you find someone who you can talk to or be with, someone understanding who can just listen and be with, and you withdraw yourself as much as you can from the thing that's causing the problem in the first place. But having that social aspect, hard as it is, because you're actually pushing people away because that's how you've been designed. And sometimes, and nature is the other thing. And eventually starting to do things you enjoy doing will creep back. But you have to remember, it takes a long time to recover from this. This is not a month or two. This is 6 months to a year, and sometimes longer. There have been plenty of signs when you look back on it, it's warning you that it was going to happen, but we tend to ignore them because we feel we need to carry on. Yeah. And that's where you do need to have help, because it can be much more serious than that, where you start to get the bipolar type of things, or even suicidal and other things like that. So I think none of us is, we talk about productivity, which is a big part, but we've got huge capacity to cope. But so when we do get to that bit, we really have drained most of our energy, and we're in a bad way then.
Yeah. And if we take it back a bit, so we're perhaps chronically stressed, and you're talking about that belonging and safety, and what are some of the things that we can do, not having to wait until it's medication or counselling. It's a case of, I can tell that this stress is quite chronic and I'm feeling this way. What are some of the things that you can do to help fulfill some of that lack of need?
One of the things that's hardest is being honest with ourselves, because we're all so different. So some people will be able to cope with that kind of mountain of problems and sail through it, and others hardly touch any of those problems and just can't deal with it. So we're so different. And we compare ourselves often with colleagues who seem to have superpowers. And unfortunately, some people do. Some people just, that's how they're built and made and everything.
But also, there's lots you don't see, right?
Exactly, right. You don't know quite what's going on behind.
Someone might be thinking that about you. And
so we think we have to keep up with all of that. So we have to be honest with ourselves. No, something's wrong. Let's face it, something wrong. And then what you're trying to do is to bring enough of the ventral vagal nerve in charge and remove the sympathetic and the cortisol away. Now, you can do it in tiny little bits. So let's say we're just sitting here, and you make a little smile to me, and I think, oh, that's nice. Claire's agreed with something I've just said. Those small little things, take them, grab them, because you'll feel validated. You'll feel a bit valued. your vagal nerve will just have a little peep in there, and then it will come back down again. You look at some sunlight coming through. You hear a bird song. Someone's made a nice cup of coffee. You've tasted something. These are moments where you're seeing outside your own brain. You're into the world outside, and you're starting to connect with actually some really nice things. And you dwell on them just for a few seconds. But what they found is that brings a vagal nerve up, and it's called the ventral vagal brake.
Okay.
Because if you just go on adrenaline all day, you literally go out of control. You're going down a hill, it's getting faster and faster and faster, until at the end of the day, you go, you're completely done. If you have those moments all the time, all the way through the day, and this is a bad day, I'm talking about a really, really bad day, you're worse, everything's going wrong. The phone calls, everything's bad news, and, it's a disaster. Keep those ventral vagal brakes on, because there's a world out there which is still as beautiful. The sun is still shining. Your family is still there. There are things that are still okay, and it stops you from going completely out of control. Now, during your off time, you've got to amplify those hugely. So you start to do the things you really want to do, the hobbies, the things that are for you.
Yeah.
You also make sure your social connections are really built up, and your physical activity is one of the key things to get that capacity back again. And even though your body may not be, some people, when they're stressed, that's the only thing they want to do. For most of us, it's the thing that kind of is one of the things that gets compromised quite quickly.
Yeah.
So you have to overcome that and start walking to start with, hopefully in nature. Nature changes the prefrontal cortex of the brain to stop you from having this doom and gloom type of feelings, this rumination. And that leads to depression. So nature's been worked out that it's so prehistoric and that it really works.
Yeah.
It also makes the amygdala smaller after a 60-minute walk in nature.
Wow, okay.
And your hippocampus goes a bit larger. So in 60 minutes, you'll have changed the shape of your brain to actually be far more ability. So I would say have those little micro breaks of, and they call it mindfulness in some ways. They call it, presenteeism and all that kind of thing. Look at those. Look at the bigger things when at weekends and evenings. Make sure your family's social and connections are there. Make sure the nature, the physical activity, and you're doing the things you really enjoy. And then eventually, if that still isn't working and you still see yourself kind of falling in a way into this tiredness and keeping up, you've then got to look at your work. It may not be the first thing you need to look at initially, because there may be lots of things you can do and it all sorts out. And that's where I'd come to you, Claire, and say, so as a manager, how do you then kind of deal with someone who's literally going down? They really love it. They really want to carry on working in the job, but they just feel it's just not doing it's not working.
Well, I was thinking you were talking about, belonging, valued and safety. So I feel like that's quite an interesting framework to think about in your workplace environment. Okay, so how, what is helping you to feel these things, and actually what's making maybe you feel threatened under these certain things, and some of them might be about the kind of wider thing that's happening in the organisation, but it might be like, but what can we do to create enough of a sense of safety in your role? And is that through being really clear about what the expectations are, being not being too ambiguous in the things that you're communicating? A lot of people will feel additional stress just because a manager isn't communicating clearly with them in terms of what they do want from them, what they don't want from them. I think sometimes we often assume that everyone understands or can read between the lines, or they can be clear about what it is exactly that they need. So it's going, actually, what is it for you personally that I can do to help you feel more comfortable? So as a leader, I think that we often assume that we know, or we assume that we can put people in a certain box and then go, okay, so I'll give you this. So for example, saying I have depression, or I'm autistic, or I am caring for an aged mother at home, whatever the situation is. Okay, great, you've said that, so therefore what does the handbook say? Right, okay, we'll give you this, this and this and this, and these are the reasonable adjustments that we can give you in your job. Versus saying, do you know who knows you best? It's you. So what can we do to help you be at your best in this role? And that often we're scared that we're going to open up this can of worms where someone says, oh, well, I need this and this, and I need a £10,000, monitor or chair. But most of the time it's someone saying, I wish that like you'd perhaps acknowledge my successes more, or I wish that it was really clear about when we're supposed to be in the office and when we're not supposed to be in the office. I wish that we were able to talk more about some of the things that have gone wrong without feeling like we're going to be judged. It's like, what are the things that actually every individual needs to feel at their best? And that helps build trust as well, because it's not just saying, what do you need? It's going, and this is what I need as a leader, and this is what I need from you. And these are the boundaries I have in place, and these are my expectations. And having that conversation regularly as a team helps it not just be I'm singling you out as someone who's struggling, what can we do to help? It's saying we all deserve as individuals to work in a way that works for us, because we're all different, as you said, and we all need different things. And obviously that's within the reasonable bounds of what the role needs. But a lot of the time, this stuff is not big changes. It's just certain tweaks or requests in terms of communication or slight formatting or ways of working changes. So being able to understand that for people and be able to make the changes that you can. And I like the idea of going to that, okay, well then what of these things sit around, belonging and value and safety, and where are some of the things that perhaps we don't have a huge amount of control on, but we can mitigate some of the impact, and some of the things we do have control on. So what can we do to change that and shift it to help improve? So I think that's a good... It's quite a simple place to sit down and start talking about it, instead of it just feeling like a blank slate of, okay, well, what can I do to help you? Because when you're in a position where you're feeling so overwhelmed, I think that's often the last question you need. You're like, why do I also have to tell you how to help me?
Yes, exactly. And it's funny because it's the same relationship with any relationship at safe, value, belonging. It's like a personal relationship.
Yeah.
The first thing you want is safety. You want you don't want to be unpredictable. You don't want to be abusive.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't want to be controlling at all.
Yeah.
So all of those things, obviously, and the same with management is feeling safe. You can go to them and say, look, I don't think you're doing it right, or whatever, or I'm vulnerable. And the value is that you're validated by what you're doing. You feel well done. You've done a good job. Sometimes it's so simple to say that.
And people forget. I think they just whiz on to the next thing. And I think such a powerful thing as a leader is to say, you did this, it was good because of this, and this is why I appreciated it, versus just assuming everyone knows they've done a good job and move on to the next thing. It doesn't take much, it costs nothing, and it makes such a big difference to people.
And psychologically, it's often the managers who don't give themselves much thank, because they're hard, they're hardest on themselves.
Yeah.
So they never give themselves any value at all. They're the ones who find it then hard to give to other people, because they say, well, that's not me. I don't do that. And so that's some of the things you have to learn. You have to override your own things like that. I think the other thing we were just going through when you were saying right at the very beginning about all these unnecessary meetings and everything else like that is we're probably not very good at prioritizing what we need to do and what we don't need to do. And you mentioned about what we have control over and what we don't.
Yeah.
So we fret about the things, particularly if there's a fallout with a relationship, whether it's personal or work, and we really fret about it, but actually it may not be in our control.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, so actually, let's move on to the things you can control.
Yeah.
And there are lots of things we do because we emotionally think we ought to do it or we should do it. There's dreadful words that were of the guilt. The guilt words.
With extra shame attached. I heard it described once.
That's brilliant. And so we're doing, and sometimes all you need is someone else, a friend or your other half or something, to sit down with them and say, these are the things. And they say, why are you worried about that? Forget it.
Yeah.
Get rid of that. You don't need to put, and it could be a family member or something like that where you fall out, but you feel guilty. And they'll always make you feel guilty because that's what they're doing. You just need some sense to come in to help you prioritize, because we're bad at prioritizing ourselves because our emotions get in the way.
Yeah. And we live in a world now where we're so plugged into everything that then you find yourself worrying about someone posted something on LinkedIn and it annoyed me what she'd posted. And I keep thinking about like a response to her. I never would, because I never get into arguments online. But it's like, it's taking energy and it's completely just so irrelevant and so like outside of my control. And what she thinks doesn't matter at all in any shape or form, but it's that you get pulled into that stuff. And when we are so plugged in to be able to see stories of war, like, political unrest, all of this stuff happening around the world, it's so easy to get our attentions pulled into that rather than saying, what is within my realm of control? What can I do and what can't I do? And what can I do to perhaps let go of some of that stuff? And even if that is just not reading it anymore or putting that boundary in place, because we get so pulled into the stuff that we have no control over. And then and I was reflecting that on the walk here actually, is I feel like I have a visceral response when someone says, oh, this country's gone to the dogs, or the world's on fire. Like, I get it, but it feels so, it's right in the middle of like victim country, right? Because I've got no control about the world, what the world is happening, and I've got very, very minimal control in terms of what's happening within the country. So for me, it feels pointless and really hopeless to spend too much energy or attention on that. You can have a moan, and I definitely think that we need space to moan about things. You've got to like let it out, but it's about going, but what is it that I can do? And actually, that is so beyond my realm of influence that it doesn't. I don't want to give it more energy and time than a few minutes, because I got enough of my own problems I can possibly do something about, versus leaning into some of that stuff.
And I wonder sometimes if it's a deflection from our own problems, that people use that as an excuse almost, or an external thing. So they've got their own problems.
They did nothing. Like, it's not their fault.
It's not their fault. Yeah. So use that, and that's why I'm miserable. It's because of them out there. Yeah. Actually, you've made some daft decisions, and it put you in a situation. Okay, we all make daft decisions. I'm not going to blame you, but just accept that it's those decisions you made that have made you there, and the world will carry on. But it's often the world is a horrible. I mean, as you say, and I do get a visceral response. I remember there was a professor from Harvard or something that said Britain was responsible for all the problems of the world, of the current things, and it made me so cross because I'm so patriotic. And I thought, and for even a year later, I'm still thinking how I'd answer him. What a waste of time that is.
I know.
But we do get consumed by, and of course the media are trying to get that visceral response, because that's how we get attention. See, so good news is about, and I'm making this up a bit, but it's about 10 times less impact it has on our brain than bad news, because we're survival.
Yeah,
we have to survive. So we have to look at the negatives, because they're the things that could finish us off. So that's why all news has to be bad or emotional, envy, or any of those other things, because they're the ones that drive our attention.
Yeah.
And they've worked that one out really quickly. But they're all the things that create our chronic stress as well, because they don't let us go. Yeah. So social media, without any doubt, has contributed to some of this. And it's impersonal, it's out there, it gets us, it makes us feel viscerally, unless you love little Labrador puppies running around, which can
that's
be the opposite.
What I try and fill my algorithm with. But then something sneaks in and you're like, what? No.
How dare you?
Yeah, don't want that.
One of the things I was going to just also talk about, we talked about chronic stress, and there's this other thing, and the word chronic, I always have to kind of validate it, because chronic means long-term, but in a medical term, but a lot of people think it means severe. So when they say, I've got chronic pain, they think that means severe pain.
Right.
It doesn't mean, it just means you've got long-term. So chronic means long-term. So stress, chronic stress, long-term stress. And then you've got chronic inflammation, which is long-term inflammation. Now, the immune system really should be like a big surge of immunity, and then it drops back down to virtually nil. And then there's a maintenance that's going around all the time, checking out. And we've got these little natural killer cells on in our nasal area, in our lungs, on our skin, elsewhere, checking for what's coming in the body. And so when a virus comes in, they'll recognize and think, hang on, that's not a good thing. I'm going to go for it. And they're the first first little things that are actually going to send the alarm.
Yeah.
And they're picking up cancer cells all the time. So we have cancer cells going around our body the entire time.
Wow.
And these little natural killer cells are always there saying, hang on, what's going on? When you become chronically stressed, acute stress, they rise and go down. Chronic stress, they go down because they're taking up a lot of energy, as with the entire immune system. But bizarrely, what tends to happen, it doesn't drop to being that you will get infections, which you do, but it also, because of various bits and pieces going on in the body, starts to fight the body itself. So it doesn't quite know who the enemy is and what the good guy. Now, the places where that can happen is visceral fat, the tummy fat, which we pick up when we're stressed, because it's a reserve of energy in case we go into starvation. So if you're in a hostile environment, it may be that there's a drought or a famine. So what the body does is it stores up energy there, and that's why we get this visceral fat. It's meant to be temporary. The cells, a little bit of detail, this is so far away from a corporate culture, but I'm going to, but I am going to say it because it does, you'll see why. The little fat cells get bigger rather than more of them. So there are two ways of getting fat. Either you've got loads more fat cells, or each fat cell gets bigger. These ones just get bigger, which means the centre of them doesn't get any attention of oxygen or nutrients. It's too far for the nutrients to travel.
Right.
So it dies off in the middle.
Right, okay.
Which creates loads of cytokines, which are little messengers saying, help, there's a problem, there's a problem. So the immune system rushes in and it starts to attack your own fat cells because it knows those fat cells are not very healthy.
Right.
And that's all directed by mitochondria.
Right.
So your fat is a massive inflammation area around the tummy, not anywhere else on the body, just that visceral fat around the organs.
Right.
You've also got the leaky gut syndrome, which you've probably heard of, which stress also makes worse. And that means that you've got little bits of bacteria coming through the bowel wall now because they're not being held back. And there are other areas as well where there's inflammation. That chronic inflammation is known to cause heart disease, diabetes, but in the brain, it also has a big effect on making us feeling depressed, etc. It uses up more energy again. So another set of energy now, the immune system is now it's not being very helpful for fighting infections. It's now fighting you, and it's doing problems there. And the more stressed you become, the more your immune system becomes dysfunctional. And unfortunately, those people in COVID who went into ITU all had that type of dysfunctional. They either had diabetes or they had big tummies.
Right.
And it's a known thing that you get what you call a cytokine storm. Now, the reason I'm saying all of that is because it's drawing more energy away from you, which means your concentration goes even further down. It means you're now picking up more diseases and colds and coughs and things like that. And it feeds on this chronic stress and chronic inflammation working together to really take you out of your normal, your best that you can be. Your exercise will drop. You just won't be able to perform. So chronic stress, in a way, then leads on to these other things, which actually then are really taking you out, and you won't perform.
Yeah.
And you know that. You're feeling tired, you're not energized, you become lethargic, you eat the wrong things because you're trying to just get more calories into yourself because you're actually feeling your starvation kind of thing, so because you're stressed. And I think you can see it in people. And that's why, as a GP for 35 years, I can see someone and I think, they've had chronic stress. They come in, they're stooped, they've got a bit overweight, they've lost their gleam, they've lost their energy, they're slower. And we've all seen that in friends or colleagues. And as a manager, when you start to see someone being withdrawn and starting to kind of not looking after themselves so much and everything like that, that's where you should be getting the very first signs that something's happening. So it's not just the chronic stress in the brain and everything else. The entire body is being affected, which is why I wanted to mention it. This is a systemic problem now. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's not just a knock-on effect on your mental health. There's so many physical impacts as well. And you mentioned about, spotting those signs, which is important. But I also think like that's really far down the line versus saying, actually, every day I strive to create an environment where people are not in, survival mode. And yes, there will be times where there'll be an acute stress, right? But my goal as a leader, as a company, is to not be creating an environment that is activating the stress response. We won't always get there, but that is the goal. And now let's look at the way that our leaders behave, the way that we work, our processes, our expectations, our communications with each other, and also the behavioural norms that I talked about. What do we normalise in terms of behaviours? What do we say is acceptable here? What's not acceptable? And then also, what are the tools that we are equipping ourselves, our leaders and our people with to be able to manage it in the moment? And how are we making sure that the peaks and troughs of work are, that you've got that space for recovery? That means that it's not just about saying, oh, we can spot that someone is feeling stressed and now let's adjust stuff. It's saying our goal is almost, those where it's like our aim is 0 days without any accidents. It should be like our goal, we'll never get there because we understand that life is life, but our goal is to not be creating, we're not contributing to the stressful situation, and we're creating an environment where people aren't in that survival mode, not only because of all of the we get to kind of stop the journey before it goes down that, but also because then our people trust each other more, collaborate better, are more innovative. We stay ahead of the competition because we spot more things. We raise problems before they become issues. And people aren't pulled back by their energy is going to performing and being at their best, not whatever that was happening with the visceral fat. They are focusing on doing all of that stuff. So not only does it prevent the negative knock-on effect of people going down this journey, it also unlocks this incredible opportunity for people to be able to perform at their best. And that is, that's very lucrative. That's great in terms of performance as an organisation, and it's great in terms of your share prices and your performance. So it seems like a no-brainer.
It's that
focus on that more.
That high performance team. That's what you all dream of. That's what we want, and it's achievable. And I'd say it is exactly that. You've got two choices with your staff. You can take them down that path of a chronic stress to chronic inflammation,
pushing at it.
And when you think of all that energy, about 20% of energy that is now being taken away from work, and actually is being trying to make the body into a stress mode and inflammation mode, and it's probably even more than that. So that energy could actually just be put back into the company and you have a thriving, creative, loyal, happy staff, and it's not out of the question to do that. Yes, there'll be, as you say, the stresses there. And I think from a human point of view, it is quite simple. You just make them feel that safe, value and belong, which are the absolute safe because I don't have to say safe. Value is because when we start off as a little sibling, we have to get our mother's milk, so we have to feel valued and loved. If we don't, we're going to be kicked out. So actually, and then when you find a mate, you need to feel valued in order to get the best mate. So it's really primitive. Being valued or being self-valued is really, really primitive. And belong is particularly a human thing because we survived. Homo sapiens beat everyone else because we collaborated. So when you think how primitive those three things are, all we're trying to do is make a company where those three things are kind of are worshipped almost. They're the kind of foundation. And then you'll have staff who don't feel chronically stressed. They might have relationship problems at home. They might have illness at home. They might be caring for their parents. Of course, we can't control all of those things, but we can jolly well make sure that when they come to work, that's their respite almost from things as opposed, and they will reward us for that.
And you're not making it worse unnecessarily.
No. And they'll stay. They'll hopefully stay and be grateful in a way, because life is not easy. It's not for all of us. It's not easy. No. You never know what's around the corner. But if a workplace is the place where people associate with that stress, they will go into survival mode. And as we've just heard all the way through this, it's so negative and it's so dangerous for that person and for the company and for the people around. And it is avoidable.